Everyone. Over the next few weeks, I'm going to do some videos for facilitators on techniques to maximize your responsiveness and effectiveness with groups. I'm going to take it from some of the challenges that facilitators have raised with Jane Martin and I when they come to our Facilitation Masterclass Series. So today's challenge comes from a pair of co-facilitators who felt like they were often missing things that were going on in a group. You know, when technically you're sticking to the plan, but you feel like you're missing something. So there are lots of how-tos out there for technical facilitation. You know, there's structures, there's procedures and models, which are super useful. Personally, I love a good structure. A good structure goes a long way. And when they're working, it's great. But sometimes they just don't attend to things like this. And I'm talking about the moments when you've got a hunch that something's going on underneath, or things get a little out of control and you kind of just don't know what to do. So in this specific case, I'll just read what they said. They said it all felt very superficial. There was obviously stuff going on in the background, and we had permission to bring stuff up, but we just didn't know where to start. We were worried that we weren't surfacing things, but just didn't know whether what we were picking up were the right things to make it useful or valuable to the group. So, firstly, I really empathize with this feeling. You know, as facilitators, we're often juggling a lot of competing needs. You know, you're usually reading a multitude of signals in a room. You've got some sort of brief or agenda that you've got to achieve, and that may or may not align with what's actually presenting to you or turning up in the group. So if I dig underneath that, the essence of it really comes down to three kind of common facilitator questions. So what do I do when I don't know what's going on? Do I stick with the assigned process, or do I lean into what's actually happening here? And if I don't stick to the process and lean in, what do I focus on to make whatever it is that's happening useful and valuable for the group? So I'm going to share some ideas on that. And it's by no means exhaustive. Just some basic ideas that hopefully might be helpful for someone. I'll start with some basics, and then I'm going to cut to the golden rule, one of many golden rules for facilitators. So many golden rules. So let's make this real. So let's imagine you're facilitating a group and you're just kind of overwhelmed with stimulus. You know, somehow things have got a little bit out of control. It's like there's sort of things flying around all over the place. And you notice internally this kind of sense of what is going on. So let's start with that. I mean, first things first, prioritize anchoring yourself. So as a facilitator, you're often the holding container for a group. So taking your own body sensations seriously is important, and attending to them. So you can do this. There's two different types of anchors you can use in this moment to anchor yourself. There's a body anchor and there's a context anchor. So a body anchor is just really attending to your body. So finding a way to ground yourself, whatever works to bring yourself back into the moment, particularly if you're feeling overwhelmed, you know. So different things work for different people. It might be just feeling your feet on the ground, might be tapping some part of yourself, might be just taking in a deep breath. Whatever it is, just take 10 seconds and make it happen. Now, Tara Brach refers to this in meditation as pause. It's like this opportunity to just stop for a really short moment. It doesn't have to be big. So don't be afraid to pause. It's actually kind of radical to stop. You know, we kind of our brains are going like this. So just to take a moment and just stop and ground yourself physically. Don't underestimate the power of it. It can be really useful. The second type is a context anchor. So that's reminding yourself of the purpose of why the group's meeting. This will always be your anchor in the storm. So, it's one of those things of just going, okay, so how is this related to our purpose? Why are we here again? How is this related to our purpose? Yeah. So let's imagine that you've taken a moment to pause, come back to your body, you've reminded yourself of the purpose. So the question is then, do you stick to the plan or do you lean into whatever it is that this thing is that is currently in front of you? So the next part is to kind of check through the basics. Know your constraints. So, what time frame are you working in? Like if this is happening in the last 5 minutes of your session, then leaning into something is likely not going to work. Yeah. And then consider whether you've got permission actually to lean more deeply into something. So depending on the context, some facilitators will have that license kind of built into their role. They'll be able to, lean into something, challenge something, but others won't. So if you've been contracted to do that, or if you haven't been contracted to do that, or you really sense the group's going to obviously be against it, it's probably not the time. So you've got the basics out of the way. You've checked in with yourself. You've gone through the basics. So now you come into, you've decided, okay, I'm going to lean into it, but what on earth do I focus on? What do I do with this mess? And here's where we get to one of the golden rules for facilitators. And that is to place your trust in the signals and feedback from the group to tell you what's right. Now that, I can imagine you're like, what does that mean, Beck? It's just like really broad. Let me break that down a little bit. Firstly, personal feedback, so your own internal feedback, is also part of the group field. So if you're feeling overwhelmed in a group, others are likely to also be feeling that. And you can harness that by bringing it into the group. Like, even just saying, is it just me, or would it be helpful to slow down a little for a moment and just remind ourselves of why we're here? Check in with them. Secondly, and this is the big one, trusting the wisdom of what is happening in the group. Now, that can be really hard, particularly when it feels overwhelming, but it's actually really important because once we can put our faith and our trust in groups having their own wisdom, and that means letting go of our associations with what we think is right, it relieves us and it allows us to work with the group rather than try and control the group. And this is not just relieving for facilitators, it's actually really relieving for groups because it's strengths based. People resent feeling like they've got it wrong. And so if you're feeling that, they're probably going to pick it up. And for the facilitator, it relieves you of the struggle to have to hang on to something. Yeah. A good kind of motto is that there are no good or bad groups. Groups just are. So even just reminding yourself of that can be helpful. And this leads me into my next point, which is really about sort of taking a bigger view of this and really start seeing all feedback from a group, and that means verbal but also non-verbal, as simply data to notice and get curious about, rather than a kind of personal indictment, because that data is your wayfinding system as a facilitator. And to be the best facilitator and to be the most useful we can to our groups, we need to calibrate ourselves to those signals and that data. So if a group's here to make some really important decisions and the group's feeling really flat and dead, rather than blame yourself or, try and energize them or lift their spirits, you might just get curious. You might bring that in and go, because it's a signal, right? So you might go, I'm noticing there's a flatness here. And I'm wondering what that might mean for the decisions that we need to make today. So you're bringing it in. So you're trusting the feedback. You're not judging the feedback, but you're bringing it in for purpose. And if in doubt, if you're really lost, just ask the group explicitly. So whilst reminding them of their purpose. So it might be if there's lots going on, you might go, I'm noticing that there are lots of competing ideas coming up here. Is it worth us taking the time to explore the relevance of that to the decisions that we're here to make? And then be guided by their answers. I mean, at the very least, it's engaging them in the choice. But what you're really taking note of as a facilitator is the energetic answer to your question. So it might be that they say, it might be that actually they kind of didn't realize and they go, oh, no, we have to make that decision. Let's get to it. And they're all aligned and that happens. That could happen. But it might also be that they say, no, we don't have time for it. But you notice that there's a lot of energy around that. Yeah. So you still need to, as a facilitator, I need to respect the no. But the heightened energy indicates that this is meaningful for the group in some way. So you might bear that in mind for, future designing with the group, or you might take it out of the group into smaller discussions with decision makers, for example. Which really leads me to my next focus, which is basically this idea that making energetic feedback your due north as a facilitator. But that's for another time. For now, if you're a facilitator who really wants to create the most meaningful outcomes for your groups on their terms, then register now for our Facilitation Masterclass. I just had a big thunderbolt. Wow, the thunder is coming. It's time to register. So there are 5 sessions based on, key issues that have come up from facilitators that they wanted to lean into. It's with Jane Martin and myself. I encourage you to register. I'll put the link further down and we look forward to seeing you there. Thanks.